It's May 1945. World War II is over. Hitler is dead, Germany has surrendered, and the world is finally breathing a sigh of relief. The largest, deadliest conflict in human history has come to an end. But deep in the Austrian Alps, inside a medieval castle, the war is far from over. In fact, one of its strangest and most forgotten battles is just about to begin. This is the story of a battle that should have never happened, where enemies became allies and fought side by side against a common foe. It's the story of the Battle of Castle Hittler, a moment so bizarre that history almost erased it completely. Imagine the scene. The war has officially ended. Soldiers are laying down their arms, prisoners are being liberated, and a sense of cautious hope is spreading across Europe. But not everyone got the memo. The SS, the most fanatical and ideologically driven arm of the Nazi regime, refused to accept defeat. For them, surrender was not an option. Driven by a desperate, last-ditch loyalty, pockets of SS units roamed the countryside, ready to fight to the last man. And high in the mountains of Austria stood Hittler Castle. For centuries, it had been a landmark, a fortress of stone and history. But during the war, it had been repurposed by the Nazis into a high-profile prison. It wasn't just any prison, though. Castle Hittler held some of France's most important figures, former prime ministers, top generals, political rivals of the Vichy regime, and even a famous tennis star. These weren't soldiers. They were political prisoners, VIPs held as bargaining chips. With the collapse of the Third Reich, their guards had abandoned them, leaving them in a strange limbo. They were free, but trapped, alone and isolated in the mountains. They were vulnerable, and they knew the die-hard SS were still out there. If the SS were to find them, there would be no trial, no negotiation. It would be a massacre. The war may have ended for the world, but for the prisoners of Castle Hittler, the most dangerous part was just beginning. As the prisoners inside the castle looked out at the beautiful but menacing alpine landscape, they knew they needed help, and fast. The solution came from a place no one could have predicted. A German army officer, Major Joseph Gangl, was stationed nearby. He was a Wehrmacht officer, not SS. He was a professional soldier who had grown disillusioned with the Nazi regime and its atrocities. When he learned of the impending SS attack on the castle and the prominent French figures inside, he faced an impossible choice: follow orders that no longer made sense, or follow his conscience. He chose his conscience. But his small unit of German soldiers was no match for the Waffen-SS. He knew he couldn't do it alone. So, Major Gangl made one of the most audacious decisions of the entire war. With a white flag tied to his vehicle, he drove into the nearby town of Kufstein and surrendered himself and his men not just to any Allied force, but to the Americans. He walked right up to the American soldiers, the very men he had been fighting against just days before, and explained the situation. He told them about the castle, the French prisoners, and the imminent threat from the SS. It was a surreal moment. An American captain, John Jack Lee Jr., listened to this German officer's plea. He had no orders to engage in new battles. His war was supposed to be over, but he couldn't ignore the plea to save innocent lives. This led to a scene that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. American soldiers and German soldiers, former enemies, stood together, planning a mission. They looked at each other, not as adversaries, but as men with a shared, terrifying problem. Alone, they would all be doomed. The Americans were too few. The Germans were outgunned. It was born from a basic, human need to survive and to protect others. 14 American soldiers, about 10 German soldiers who had followed Major Gangl, and a handful of the no-armed French prisoners prepared to defend the castle. As dawn broke on May 5th, the attack began. The surrounding woods came alive with the crackle of gunfire. The SS had arrived, and they were determined to take the castle. They were more numerous. They had heavier weapons, including an anti-aircraft gun they turned on the castle walls, and they were filled with a fanaticism that the defenders could hardly comprehend. The defense of the castle was a desperate, chaotic affair. The only real heavy firepower the defenders had was a single American Sherman tank, commanded by Captain Lee himself. He parked it right in front of the castle's main gate, using it as a stationary pillbox. But the tank was already damaged, and its machine gun was barely functional. Still, it was a crucial psychological and physical barrier. Inside, the fighting was brutal and up close. Bullets ricocheted through stone corridors that had stood for centuries. The sound of explosions echoed off the ancient walls. This wasn't some symbolic last stand. It was a real vicious firefight. Tragically, Major Gangl, the German officer who had initiated this incredible alliance, was killed by a sniper while trying to help a former French Prime Minister get to safety. He died a hero, fighting alongside his former enemies. As the day wore on, the situation grew more dire. The defenders were running dangerously low on ammunition. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and the castle walls were beginning to crumble under the relentless assault of the SS. The main gate was blown apart, leaving only the now destroyed Sherman tank as a barricade. It felt like the end was near. The SS were preparing for a final all-out assault to breach the walls and overwhelm them. Just when all hope seemed lost, a moment of incredible courage turned the tide. One of the prisoners, the French tennis star Jean Baratra, made a daring decision. He knew their only hope was to get a message to the American reinforcements who were supposedly on their way. So Baratra, dressed in his athletic clothes, vaulted over a castle wall and made a mad dash through open enemy fire. He ran, dodged, and scrambled through the SS lines, using his athletic prowess to evade capture. It was a suicide mission, but somehow he made it through. He found the American relief force and guided them back toward the castle. Back at the fortress, every second felt like an eternity. The defenders fired their last rounds. The SS were massing for the final push. Then, just as the SS began their charge, a new sound filled the air. The rumble of tanks. But this time, they weren't enemy tanks. American reinforcements had arrived. Faced with a fresh, well-armed American force, the SS had no choice but to retreat, melting back into the forests. The siege was broken. The battle was over. The castle had held. Inside the battered fortress, an extraordinary group of survivors stood together. American soldiers, German soldiers, and French dignitaries. They had been enemies just days before, but in the crucible of battle, they had become allies. They had fought and bled together, united not by a flag, but by their shared humanity. The Battle of Castle Hittler is a footnote in the grand sweep of World War II, but it's a powerful one. It remains the only documented instance where American and German soldiers fought on the same side during the war. It's a testament to the idea that even in the darkest of times, people can choose to do the right thing. It's a story where the lines between friend and foe blurred, and survival depended on trusting the person next to you, regardless of their uniform. It's a story so strange, so unlikely, that it was almost forgotten by history, overshadowed by the larger events of the war's end. But it's a story that deserves to be told, a reminder that courage and decency can be found in the most unexpected of places. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, please consider subscribing for more forgotten tales from history. See you next time.